Hello and welcome from me, Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. And many thanks again for joining us in the latest, which is now the 13th in a series of special interviews themed around sharing best practices across car retailers to manage their way through the COVID-19 crisis. Previous interviews, as you're aware, have been with people from Sytner's Group's Derren Edwards, Virtue Motors, Robert Forrester, Peugeot UK boss Darren Peel and Marshall Motors Group Dash Gupta. And they're all available still to stream online from Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, motortraderadio.com and other streaming stations. So over to you, Curtis.
So we're delighted to welcome our special guest today, Derren Martin, Head of UK Valuations at CAP HPI. So welcome to the show, Derren.
Thank you.
Yeah, we seem to have been quoting you a lot in recent weeks on the Headlines podcast at the weekend. So it's good to finally catch up with you and hear it straight from the horse's mouth now.
Yeah, there's been plenty going on over the last few weeks, so there's always been a lot to talk about. Yeah.
So, I mean, Derren, it's as Curtis has said. I mean, it's great to have you on. It's been far too long, and get you on the podcast. And like I say, with a lot of stuff been going on through this last 12 weeks now, isn't it? We're in the 12th week of lockdown, albeit we're getting a bit of restriction lift. But obviously, there's been plenty to talk about with obviously showrooms in both England and now Northern Ireland now opening again. Although Wales and Scotland remain closed for the time being. So plenty of interest into the state of play regarding the used car values, as you can quite imagine. But perhaps you could start with your take on what has happened through the wholesale market during lockdown with regards to volumes and whether the market shut down completely, really.
So with the lockdown announcement on the 24th of March, we decided that we wouldn't move any values in our products from that time because it was obviously the market was going to completely shut. So we actually saw it slightly earlier than that, really. From about the 16th of March, there were conversion rates dropping, less people buying, and values did drop. So values dropped for a period of time. Then we switched the values, we chose not to move them. During that time, it was interesting to still analyse what data we were getting, and what certainly wasn't shut down completely, as you said, because we were still getting volumes, but we would normally get on wholesale data, so trade to trade, we get around 160 to 170,000 sold trade records per month, which is about 40,000 a week. So 8,000 a day if you break that down. So during that first week of lockdown, which was the week commencing the 30th, we saw about 1,000 records over the whole week. So it was about 2.5% of normal, and very, very low volumes there. And that continued for the first couple of weeks, so into April. And but there were cars selling, so even at 1,000, those really reduced levels, the market was still open, and I think it's testament to the auctions that they were carrying on being busy. We don't get all of our data from the auctions, but at the time it was generally those that were still open. There was some buy it now prices, and there were then throughout the period of lockdown they started to open up their online capabilities. There were more buyers in the market as well, so the volumes did start to increase during that time. We didn't move any values at all during that time, until a certain point when the volumes increased, though.
Now, Derren, during that period, there was plenty of speculation on what impact the lockdown was having on used values. In your view, were prices actually affected during this time? And were there many value movements on CAP Black Book?
Yes, to answer your second bit first, we didn't move any values between the 24th of May and the 24th of March and the 11th of May. We have a live product, so although a lot of subscribers still take monthly products from us, we have a live product, so we're moving values every day. But during that time, because there wasn't enough data and it wasn't reflecting a true market, we didn't move any values for about 6 weeks. But we were still analysing the data and looking into what was happening in the market. And for those first 2 weeks, when, as I said, the volumes were really low, prices really dipped. They dipped to around 80% of cap during that time, just above 80% of cap. But those were generally on lower value cars. The average selling price was below £4,000. It's easier to affect the percentage of cap on those sorts of values. You don't have to move it much in pound note terms to affect the percentage. They were generally cars in poorer condition, and the cars that were being sold were, I guess, people wanting to realise a bit of cash. So they were very low at that time. You could have maybe expected that that values were going to come down dramatically. What we saw after that, though, was a real recovery in prices from those low points, steadily increasing. As the volumes increased, the values increased, and the percentage of cap went steadily up from those low points up in the early 80s to about 96% of cap just before car showrooms reopened, and then looking at sort of 99% of cap now. And bearing in mind that's cars in all conditions, so that's not a direct comparison to clean, because a lot of those cars are in average or below the condition. That's quite a strong performance, so that did definitely improve over the period. So they were affected initially, but we weren't moving any values. It wasn't a true reflection of the market. And then as volumes increased, we started to then move values on cars from the cars that we moved values from the 11th of May, but that was only on cars over 5 years old, because that was where the majority of the volume was and where we were confident that it was reflecting the market.
So as you say, I mean, it's potentially not a true representation of the market, was it, through that period, because there wasn't true activity taking place to a certain extent then?
No, we thought that the volumes needed to get to around 15% of normal before we'd be confident in moving any values again, and even that would have been obviously very low. But we once we got to that point, and when it got to the 11th of May, volumes were just below 20% of normal. And at that point, we started to move them, because we then felt they were more representative of the market. But the movements that were made were minor. They were a lot of things didn't move. Around half of what we looked at over 5 years old didn't move at all. So the prices from March were still representative and still strong for the market, whereas things did move on average. Things that did move, the average movement was about 2%, which is about £150, something like that. So there wasn't a huge reduction. The big reduction was during those first couple of weeks when volumes were really low and not representative.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, it's a time where people need to take into context the percentage and pound value more than ever, isn't it? It's a real key indicator with what is happening in the market, rather than just taking that percentage as the given figure. That you've got to put it in context of that pound value.
It was definitely the right call not to move values during that time. It wouldn't have been fair for us to do that, and dropping things could have caused a real stir in the market by dropping to where the market actually was at that point. But the market was, as I said, 2.5% of normal. It's not a representative market for us to do that.
And in terms of the dealers, I mean, we're now on the 12th day of the month. You know, we mentioned earlier that potentially there was activity taking place through lockdown, but officially 1st of June was when the dealerships could open again. And you know, what was and what is the view from the dealer been sort of over the last few weeks, and what have you been doing to sort of help them through this as well?
So because we were always getting data, and we've also got retail data that we were analysing as well, and retail values held very firm during that time, that being advertised prices from major portals. So they were holding very firm as well then. But I think for the dealers, they weren't quite sure what was actually happening in the market. So we tried to have as many conversations as we could with small and large dealers. Really, we sort of put ourselves out there as being available to speak to anybody that wanted to talk to us about what was going on. And that was sometimes at board level with some of the big dealer groups, with CEOs, or sometimes it was just with sort of people with their sort of the boots on the ground in the dealers. But yeah, they weren't open. but they were still doing cars for key workers, a lot of them, and there was some online activity as well. And certainly what they were doing was they were still taking orders, or they were taking inquiries. They tended to keep the call centres open, even if the actual dealerships were closed. So we were advising on what we were seeing in the market at the time. We were advising on some of those percentages of cap, some of the volumes that we were seeing, looking at the detail behind that as well on specific models if required. Obviously, the customers have specific brands that they wanted to know how they were performing. So we were certainly helping them on that score. We've developed an appraisal app as well, which means that you have less. You can have less physical contact between a customer and a dealership. So you can put your reg. The consumer puts the reg number into the consumer app, into the appraisal app. They then it brings back all of the vehicle details. They can then go around and take photographs of the car, mark down where there's damage, that type of thing. So I think at that time there was obviously a lot of concern that people weren't going to be physically wishing to go to dealership. So we produced the app that meant that you could do a lot of it virtually before you actually, so they didn't have to see your car to appraise the part exchange, basically. So we were helping in that way. That's being trialled at the moment. So there's been a lot of interest in that. And my team certainly were having lots of those conversations and trying to almost sort of keep the market calm on what was happening, and saying that we weren't expecting a big drop-off in values. We did actually think there could be a more of a drop-off than has happened when car showrooms reopened, but it does seem that the pent-up demand has kept values strong. But we were certainly trying to help the industry, and also having those conversations with auction houses as well that were still being active, and the ones that weren't doing the volume, we're sort of reassuring them as well. So there was a lot of two-way conversations, and obviously we want to know what's happening from them as well as them hearing what's happening from our point of view.
Now, Derren, as we record this, there has been some media reports circulating that used values have dropped, which I noticed you challenged on social media. So I guess the big question for listeners to the podcast is, what is happening to car values right now?
Yeah, so we base our values mainly off the wholesale data, off trade data that we see. We obviously do look at retail, but there is a lag between how retail advertised prices react compared to trade transacted ones. And also it's important to note that those retail values are advertised prices, they're not transactional. So when other companies are looking at that, scraping that data, they aren't necessarily reflective of what's happening in the market at the time. Trade always seems to react quicker. And what we've seen some real strength. That first week back, we've spoken to a lot of dealers over the past week as well. They're really, really buoyant with how things are. There's been a lot of pent-up demand from consumers. Some of that because they haven't bought cars over the period when they were looking to, over the last 2 or 3 months. There's also been definitely people buying vehicles because they don't want to go on public transport. And I think one of the government announcements that suggested people shouldn't use public transport was probably just what the car industry needed at the time. So people looking to buy used cars. So there's definitely been a move there. If people can afford it, they have been looking to buy cars during this period. So it's been a really good week for dealers. And with regards to car values, older cars are certainly performing better. The cheaper end is going very well. And we've put some prices up. Some of our values have definitely gone up in those areas. Older German premium cars been in demand. People may be downgrading from a younger vehicle, trying to realise some cash by going to a cheaper, older car. People that haven't necessarily bought a car previously are looking at the lower end as well on smaller city cars. So generally, vehicles, cars on that lower end, cheaper end, performing very well, and a lot of values have gone up or at least stayed level. Very few drops there. At the younger age, so newer, late plater used cars, it's a bit more complicated. There are stocks in the market from March, either unregistered or registered, but without a home to go to because of when the timing of the market lockdown. There were a lot of cars that were built but didn't find a home. So it's very, very I think what we're seeing is a compression of values. We're seeing older ones particularly going up, and we've seen younger cars perhaps going down slightly in value, but only slightly.
So in terms of data, I mean, this you mentioned earlier about obviously that retail and wholesale market, and putting my Cox Automotive head on here, but over in the US, they obviously they didn't do a full lockdown. Everything went online, but obviously the showrooms didn't shut down on a US fully because it was done state by state. But they commented that the retail was down about 1 to 1.5%, but the trade wholesale prices had dropped sort of 10 to 12%. And recently we carried a survey out with the dealer network where the majority of the dealers had indicated that they were going to hold firm on retail prices until either one, they saw what the market was doing and the data from the market, or two, they were just going to hold firm, because they didn't see a view that retail prices should necessarily drop because the market has been in freeze since the 23rd of March, essentially, in most cases. But what would you say is your view in terms of that retail and wholesale prices reacting the same or differently in the current market?
It's more key than ever that they are, more apparent than ever that they're reacting differently at the moment. And we were, throughout the lockdown period, the conversations we were having, we were encouraging people to hold on to price, not to reduce. We weren't the only ones saying that, but obviously we were encouraging, treat the day you open as the one day after the day you shut, basically, rather than however long that period was. So it's very important that they held on price, and that's what's been evident in all of the retail pricing data. Whereas on the trade side, there have been ebbs and flows, demand and supply, and it reacts very differently there. And they've also, what we've definitely seen is that there are wholesale vendors who had very different strategies on selling. You've had ones that started selling at low prices, probably below the market, and we were kind of discussing with them whether that was the right thing to do. And then they've been putting their prices up as demand increased. There were others that were holding price from March and keeping them, trying to keep the prices as strong as possible and really holding out. And that's what we've seen in those percentage of cap values that I mentioned earlier, that they have been increasing through this period. So, but it's been, I would say, more volatile on the trade side than it is on the retail side. And retail always acts with a lag. And as I say, they're not transactional prices generally that other companies are reviewing. We do review that as well, and we've seen little movement there, but we have seen movement in trade. I do think that retail values could potentially go up, though. If trade prices go up, then as dealers try and maintain their margin, retail values could go up as well. But again, there could be a bit of a lag for that.
Now, Derren, we've been talking purely about cars so far. So can you share your views on what's happening to LCV values, especially as anecdotally demand for used LCVs appears to be holding up, especially as a result of demand for delivery services?
Yeah, definitely. We've seen some real strength in the LCV market, and it's been off the back of the deliveries, definitely. You've had people that have used their government grants to go out and buy vans. You're seeing now that the small shops, the corner shops and things like that didn't used to do anything, even consider doing deliveries, now advertising that they will deliver. So the LCV market has been very strong, and we're seeing their values. We didn't move any values in April or in May. So going into June's book, as people still call it, although there isn't a physical book, we didn't adjust LCV values. We are going to be adjusting them this month, and it generally at the moment we still got some time to go because obviously we're only on the 12th of June, but they are looking very strong, and older ones in particular looking strong. Some of the newer ones more level really. So, but certainly not heading down in value there. The only probably caveat to that would be something like minibuses, where people have realised, well, minibuses are struggling in value because they don't really fit with social distancing at the moment. You can't really use them, so it's more difficult in that area. But certainly for panel vans, they've been very, very strong, and we would expect them probably going forward to be slightly stronger than car values.
I mean, two questions here really, and one of them being on the back of your webinar this week, and really one of them around that sort of rental leasing market, because a lot of people are asking questions around the rental and lease market, particularly with what's happened over in the US. That isn't anything, they initially thought that was going to be impacting the UK, and it isn't. But what's your view on that rental market at the minute, the leasing rental market, and obviously that, because that has a direct influence on the wholesale market, and in terms of the values, in terms of that strength and weakness, through the market, how long do you think that could last for, with from the current position?
I think that at the moment that there are issues with transportation, so all the vehicles can't get through, and that's helping the strength. So what you've got at the moment is you've got demand, but you've got supply issues. So demand is outweighing supply. So some of those rental and leasing companies, they're not necessarily getting the vehicles through quick enough to be able to sell them. From the conversations we've had, and again we have a lot of conversations with the rental and leasing companies. They're being very careful. There seems to be a desire not to liquidate stock, so that they are not necessarily dripping them into the market, but they're certainly phasing them to come back, and being very careful. And a lot of them are trying to hold on price as well to make sure that the market doesn't drop, which is very important for the industry as well. So I think there's been quite a responsible attitude there. We don't see any particular issues unless people suddenly start thinking, well, it's really strong at the moment, let's try and realise some cash because it could come down. But I don't think the transport infrastructure would allow that to happen, either going into defleet centres and coming out of defleet centres. There's just not the infrastructure there, and it's a bit chicken and egg with furloughing as well, or unfurloughing people. Do you unfurlough when the market picks up, and will the market pick up if people are still furloughed, because there aren't the people out there to do the transporting and that type of thing. So I think at the moment it's as I say, everyone's being pretty responsible. How long will the current strength last for? Obviously it won't last forever. We are in a bit of a bubble at the moment, we think, where values are strong because there's pent-up demand. Pent-up demand won't be there forever, because that's obviously pent up from 3 months of inactivity, and that will get realised once those cars are, all those orders are realised and delivered. There will also be there are people, as I said earlier, buying because they don't want to go on public transport, and that won't last forever either. And going forward, unfortunately, there are going to be redundancies, and we're already starting to see that in the market. And people will become more prudent and more careful. So, but that could still lead to a strong used car market. But I think it will potentially be stronger at the lower end again, where people are downsizing and being very careful with what they buy. Maybe and we already saw this before all of this COVID-19, but maybe people realise that their second car, or even their third car, if they've got older kids, doesn't need to be a big car. They can have one reasonable size, maybe SUV. Their second car can be a smaller car for those local journeys, and that's now a lot more acceptable to do that. Maybe an EV or a smaller sort of city car, something like that. So I think it will. The strength is here for now, but I think everybody is wary that it won't last beyond, I would say, a few weeks.
So I suppose. Sorry, just on that. So I suppose it's just a case of there is caution ahead. There's particularly. Yeah. I mean, your webinar this week. I think it's about this live versus monthly values, and that things can be moving fairly swiftly at the minute, and the days of being able to relax and take it's gonna be there for some time. There is stability. I think you were warning that there is potential volatility ahead, and
volatility is the worst. Yeah, volatility, but in either direction. So if prices could go up, volatility doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come down. But I think you've talked as well about sort of W-shaped recoveries and things like that, and that is what you've got to expect, really, that prices could ebb and flow over a period of time, and we've seen that already this month, and we're only into day 12 of it, and you can see values could potentially move in different directions over the coming weeks. So we have a live product and we have a monthly product, but for me, live has got to be the way forward. You need to know what's happening today. Once the monthly values come out, they could be out of date within a few days. So it's really important to keep an eye on what's happening in the here and now. And the way we work with editors who have worked in the industry, who have been working at dealerships, they've worked for remarketers. They're looking at the data over a period of time. They're then looking at the most recent data and deciding what the real true picture is. And now that those volumes have gone up, and last week the volumes were around almost 50% of what you'd expect normally at this time of year. And I think this week, once we finish the week off, I think they'll be at 75 or 80% of what you'd expect normally. The auctions have adapted really well to going online. Other remarketers, we don't just get all of our data from auction, we get plenty from elsewhere. They are also now very adept at online, and also the buyers are becoming more and more used to buying online as well. So with the volumes increasing, but that supply demand dynamic, and it's all about supply and demand. And with the transport network being a little bit difficult as well, it will be really interesting to see which way values move.
And finally, Derren, and really following up on that point, can you just dig a little deeper and give us your take on how used values will perform in the medium to longer term?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work on this at CAP HPI, and we've we've had our consultants involved, our forecast team involved, and our current values team involved, and had lots of conversations over the last few weeks and months. And obviously we've never been in a situation like this before. This is new to everybody. We are experts, but we're also this is new to us. We look back at what happened in 2008 and 2009. And we quickly came to the conclusion that this is very different to them. And we don't expect values to come tumbling down as they did in 2008, and then they recovered in 2009. We do think there will be more pressure on car values this year, although there will be shortages in the market because of factory closures and then slowing getting them back up to full volumes. We also think that there will be the economic impact, unfortunately unemployment impact as well, and that always has a direct correlation with what happens to used car values. So we do think they'll be under more pressure than they would have otherwise been, but that isn't too dramatic, so it'll be slightly below where we expected them to be. We think that will last, but that will maybe kick in towards the end of this year, last for a bit of next year. Obviously you've got cars that were extended by leasing companies. They will come back. They've got to come back at some point. So PCPs being extended, that type of thing. So when that will come back. But on the plus side, we think that for people setting 3-year values, that our 3-year forecast will be relatively unchanged, we think, because we think there will be a recovery in 3 years' time. We could be in for a difficult year or so, but after that, we do actually think that the volume reductions from lack of registrations this year will actually lead to a strong market in 3 years' time. So if companies are writing PCP business now, that could be quite good news. But we will be reviewing our forecast in depth over the next month or so. It obviously takes a while, and we need the market to almost settle down a little bit now to see what the starting point of those values truly is.
I mean, fantastic, Derren. I mean, thank you for coming on. And I think really just to sort of summarise there, we are in a period of volatility, as you said, and as you clearly said, that's increases and decreases. So it's not necessarily volatility in terms of a negative, but there are increases and decreases. That there are no previous learnings with that. I think that's been apparent across everybody putting out at the minute. I think we're it's being classed as people referencing as a new norm. I think there's a lot of learnings, a lot of collaborations, a lot of discussions, and I think from what you're saying there is that that you're there to help the retailers through this, and that retail and trade is the area that needs to be we're looking at more than ever. And as you've made on the previous bit there, that live is really, you can't rely on the monthly, because things can change swiftly at the minute as people's strategies change and the market changes in terms of a supply and demand. The minute we're in a state of demand is currently outstripping supply, but that could suddenly switch where the supply and demand balance could switch very quickly in the coming weeks.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the important things are live values. Keep a very close eye on live values, and hold your nerve. Phase any sort of defleets. Hold your nerve on price, and it will stay stronger for longer if those things happen. But yeah, there's potential volatility over the coming weeks and even months. But yeah, we're definitely there to help and to have conversations and sharing of intel with dealers and any remarketers and anyone else in the market, without a doubt.
Well, Derren, many thanks for a timely update on how used values are performing. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for now. You've been listening to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Please like and share on social media, as it's important during these times for the dealer community to work together and share experiences and best practices. Many thanks to you for listening and supporting the podcast. Philip and I will be back with the industry headlines on Saturday, but do watch out for more special podcast interviews as we work through this crisis. Until next time, stay safe and stay well.